From my viewpoint, I do a lot of homework and I do an enormous amount of research about what's going on around us. I know there's a lot of folks that listen, and there's a lot of folks that are doing their own work and their own studying. But I got to tell you, the conclusion that you can draw after seeing so much evidence elicits a guilty plea, a guilty decision, a decision of guilt. And when I look at the evidence like a prosecutor, and I see the path down which our nation is moving, and the rapidity with which it's moving, the alacrity, I can draw no other conclusion. It's the equivalent of circumstantial evidence, I grant you, in some cases. And in some cases, there's clear evidence. I mean, when we talk about things like the president's consistently serial violations of the Constitution, that even the press is beginning to acknowledge now. I mean, that's not circumstantial, folks. That's factual. That's empirical evidence of guilt. When we see things like Eric Holder and the Department of Justice and some of the things that he's done and his department have done, when we look at the way in which some of the things that are under his purview and the Department of Homeland Security and some of the things that have been done in here, there's empirical evidence to show you that tyranny is alive and well today. And I show it to you all the time. But some of the other issues are just, they're lights in the darkness. And like a little LED, it's not really enough to show you the whole picture. But when you got enough of them, the room begins to light up. And the details in the room become evident to you. And suddenly you're able to see the form and the factor and the nature and the makeup of the room. And at this point, these isolated little LED lights that you would say that, well, that's not enough to even read by. But when you combine 1,000 of them, 10,000, 50, 100,000, 1 million of them, suddenly the light is so bright and so glaring, you can't help but see the obvious. There's a lot of people out there that are preparing for a coming financial collapse, a government move against America, whatever form that may take. And I'm not one to hide my views on that. I've said repeatedly and openly that we are heading into a period where soft tyranny will cease and hard tyranny will begin. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't give you a date on that. That would be foolish. But there are others out there who are also acknowledging that. And to a certain extent, I want to introduce you to the concept that you need to begin to put some practical measures in place for that eventuality. I watch a lot of and read a lot, and I came across a couple of people that I thought would be of interest to you. And I'm going to introduce you to two of them. And I'll try to do this on a more consistent basis where, I find someone who I believe epitomizes one value or another. Sometimes it's intellectual value. Sometimes it's practical knowledge. Sometimes it's, real world. Sometimes it's philosophy. In this case, there's one called the Patriot nurse. And I want to introduce you to her information because I think it's important that you understand what the capabilities are of some of the things that she talks about. She's a literal nurse, and has a series of videos up on YouTube and a website and a Facebook page. Her Facebook page is full of all kinds of information that you probably should be aware of. But in addition to that, the YouTube videos are very helpful. The Facebook page is facebook.com/The Patriot Nurse. And what I liked about her is her message, which is not one of hiding and kind of cowering in the shadows, but just plain Jane sitting out there saying, look, this is where we're at. This is where we're headed. This is what's going on. And those of you that aren't prepared to be responsible for yourselves and your families, irrespective of whatever the causational factor is that drives us to that point, where society is not functioning in the way in which we're accustomed to, where food isn't necessarily available at the grocery store, and power may not necessarily be on. And I don't care whether it's a storm, a natural storm, or a storm that comes out of D.C., or a storm that comes out of your state capital. The simple truth is, it makes no difference. But she has some very, very realistic and real-world practical application issues that I like. One was that I watched that I thought was very valuable on her Facebook, on her YouTube channel, and it's youtube.com/The Patriot Nurse. One that I thought was particularly valuable was she was talking about this issue of the FDA and drug expiration dates. And the idea was that, you know, there's an expiration date on pills and you're told to always throw them out and so forth. And she had specific documentary evidence of a military study that was done by the Department of Defense that explains that the vast majority of that is a lie. And the Department of Defense did this study because they were throwing out literally billions of dollars worth of drugs that had hit an expiration date, and it was starting to cost them money. And so they said, well, wait a second, you know, we got this penicillin here, and we've got antibiotics over here, and we've got, you know, diabetic medication over here, and we've got, you know, everything from cold sore cream to, you know, whatever, intravenous fluids. And when it hits the expiration date, you know, obviously, we got to throw it out. Well, what they found was they did their own studies on this stuff, and they found out that what the FDA and the drug companies had told them was an expiration date was a bold-faced lie. That most of the drugs that you have are actually good for months and months, maybe, and most of the time years, long after their expiration date. Their effectiveness may begin to decline a bit, but stored properly, maintained properly, they're good for years. Stuff like, you know, penicillin, right? Good for 3 to 5 years after expiration date. Yet America's told to turn that in, flush it down the toilet. Now they tell you don't flush it down the toilet because you're putting antibiotics into the water supply that everybody else has to live on. Now they have these big drug turn-in programs where you can take your old prescriptions that are expired and turn them in. Well, the truth of the matter is, that's Big Pharma's way of generating new business. And the DOD caught on to it. But in order for them to get the FDA's help, they had to sign an agreement that said, whatever the results of these studies are, you can't disclose them. So basically what you got is collusion between the Department of Defense and the Food and Drug Administration, barring you from knowing the truth. Not because it's dangerous for you to know the truth, because it's not fiscally feasible for the big pharma companies for you to know the truth. With all due respect, folks, that just pisses me off. She's kind of co-joined with another person who I like. The guy is called the Main Prepper, an ex-Spec Ops guy. And he does a lot of things. They're doing a lot of videos together now in which they're talking about, you know, how to build a survival cache and what you would need in a a real world emergency scenario and how you can prepare for that. Thinking that you're going to sit there as an example, with that little e-tool and dig yourself a hole to get into and the rain is coming down on you is probably not the best idea you've ever had. So if you've got a place where you're going to, get to in the event of an emergency, you might want to have a shovel there, a real shovel. So a lot of it's practical. But they also have a whole series on resistance. Resistance against tyranny in government. And I found it extraordinarily valuable, and I think you will too. And they're clear and concise about the fact that just because your party doesn't win an election does not qualify for active resistance. But when your rights are restricted to the point where your free speech is barred and your ability to own a firearm is barred and your ability to have your Fourth Amendment privacy respected, and you can no longer redress those grievances with your government, that's when becomes when. There's a lot of very, very practical information in these videos. And so I would strongly encourage you, there's 150 of them, I think. So, I get it, you're not going to be able to just sit down and watch them all. But I would strongly encourage you to begin the process of learning. Find those that you think are valuable. She has one on about fish antibiotics. Are they safe for humans? Government doesn't want you to store antibiotics because if you have your own supply, you're independent. Government, as we know now, does not like independence on your part. They want you dependent upon them. But also things like, what are some practical applications for, building a fire in a survival situation? Now, I'll grant you, in my hometown, there's probably a lot of people that don't really need that kind of basic information. But I know that my audience is not just domestically in my geographic zone, but is around the nation. And I know there's a lot of folks in cities that, I'll tell you what, they wouldn't know how to build a fire if their life depended on it. And they have these romanticized ideas about, I'm going to leave my comfy apartment here in, let's say, Chicago or Detroit or maybe a suburb of Seattle or a suburb of L.A. I'm going to go live in the woods when that happens. Oh, really? Okay, did you ever talk to anybody who actually does live in the woods? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It ain't the romantic dream you think it is. If you've ever spent any real time, if you think you're good, if you think you're a good prepper, I would encourage you to go out and do some primitive camping. Bring nothing with you but a pocket knife and see how comfortable you really are. But there's also some very practical stuff in here. Give you an example. One of the topics that she does is bitterness, the ultimate disease. So some of it is, a little philosophy and thrown in there, right? Biblical self-defense concepts. But some of it is very important. Storing IV fluids, blood transfusions when SHTF, you know what that stands for, when the brown stuff hits the oscillating paddles. How to deal with PTSD. How to spend your prepping money properly and narrowly focused. Some very good, valuable information there. I would encourage you to participate with her. Get onto her website. There's a lot of information on there. She offers classes, by the way, in Medical Prep 101 and 201, and a combo class called Medical Prep 101 and 201, which is ideally geared and suited and designed for people who are considering being well-trained and well-prepared. Let's put it that way. She has a bookshelf on there of great products that you would need. She has a medical and survival supply stash and gives you recommendations on products she's found to be helpful and useful. If you're looking for that kind of information, this is a great place for you to go. I would strongly encourage you to look more at her information. I've actually sent her an email, and I hope that she'll respond to me. I'd love to do some interviews with her myself and share those with you. The other person I wanted to bring to your attention is a little on the different side. This is a gal by the name of Josie. And she has a video out there that runs about 10 minutes. And I'd play the whole thing for you, but it would eat up the remainder of the time. And we're actually a little short of what you would need to see the entire thing. But I would strongly encourage you to go watch this video. First of all, she only posted it, I think, a couple of weeks ago or so. And it's gotten 25,000 views. She has a great website out there. It's called JosieTheOutlaw.com. Josie, like Josie. I guess she's playing a little on the Josie Wales thing, right? JosieTheOutlaw.com. And she also has a YouTube channel. She does not have a Facebook page that I could find, but she does have a YouTube channel. And I would encourage you to go to that. And that is Josie Outlaw. So it's youtube.com/Josie Outlaw. And the first video that she's got there is called On Being an Outlaw. She also has a message to police why good people should be armed and when resistance becomes duty. The reason I want you to pay attention and watch these is because, especially the one on being an outlaw, there's some very, very legitimate and good practical concepts in there. And as a critical thinker, I want you to think outside the box. And there's some very, very meaningful concepts that she exposes in this video, which again is only 10 minutes long. It's not like, you got to spend an hour and a half going through this long diatribe. It's very clear and concise. And our concept is not so much that you should think of the outlaw in the concept that we have of an outlaw, but the idea that just because you are an outlaw doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. When society has gotten to the point where it has now, it's almost imperative that we be outlaw. And I say outlaw not in the sense of dangerous to others. That would be a violation of their rights. But we can and should be outlaws in the sense that we can be civilly disobedient. We can take action, however microscopic, however small that may seem. An elephant's a large animal. Weighs thousands of pounds. And yet, a microscopic bacterium or a virus can be contracted by that animal, as big as it is, and literally it can replicate itself within days to the point that it will kill that animal. You've gotten sick. You wake up one morning and your throat's a little raw. You're not feeling so good, but you struggle and you get out and you get in the shower and you head off to work. Or maybe you just head off to work and you take your shower when you get home. Depends on what kind of work you do. And you feel kind of lousy during the course of the morning. And boy, by afternoon, you just sense it's getting bad. By the time you get home at the end of the day, you're barely capable of handling your own self. By nightfall and bedtime, you know you are sick. It all started with one bacterium, one viral germ, one whatever it was. You get a cut, it gets infected. It starts with one germ. But within a relatively short period of time, that germ can bring you to your knees. And the same applies for civil disobedience on a massive scale. It doesn't start out massive. It starts with one. Just that one. And soon it's 2. And then it's 4. And then it's 8, 16, 32, 64. And the question is, are you part of the growth of the good virus? Remember that a bad virus, a bad bacterium that enters your body is fought back by white blood cells that immediately boost their own generations to grow and fight that viral infection. When you get a fever, it's because your body is trying to poison and kill and burn that bad germ to death. Ladies and gentlemen, when you see what's going on around you, you have to begin to recognize the truth and be willing to accept it. Not live blithely in ignorance, knowing that it's denial-based ignorance, but cognizant of the real realities around you. And then you have to do something about it. I liked Josie's comments and her explanations for what it means to be an outlaw. And I never advocate anything violent, and I'm not advocating that now, nor is she. Don't let the word outlaw fool you. But I would like you to take the time to think outside the box and watch it once, maybe twice, maybe 3 times. Maybe watch it once and then an hour later watch it again and try to think about what she's discussing in there. And then the next day, with a clear head, watch it one more time. You see, sometimes we've got to give our mind a little time to get around the overall concept. But I want you to start thinking with a mind that is outside of and buffered against the propaganda that's fed to you by the media, by society, by these tyrants who all tell you, like Lieutenant Colonel Bateman, that your life is mine to control. And when I want your opinion, I'll tell you what it is. With all due respect, if that's the world I got to live under, I'm going to be an outlaw. The truth is, it's up to you to determine what's in your own best interest. Not some lieutenant colonel. Not some Eric Holder in the Department of Justice. Not some President Obama or Nancy Pelosi or Kathleen Sebelius or John Boehner or John McCain or Harry Reid. Who are these people that they think they can determine your future? The truth is, this is your life. And you're not obligated for any reason to allow it to be abused. Opt out. Don't participate. Separate yourself from that which you know to be against your own best interest. And don't be willing to sit there and allow yourself to be tossed about like a pawn and used by people who have evil intent. You want to know how this virus of patriotism could destroy Obamacare? It's simple, folks. Just don't participate. Don't sign up. The thing will collapse under its own weight quickly enough. We don't have to wait for Congress to do it for us. We can do it ourselves. Just an example. But one that should be followed and replicated over and over and over. You've been listening to America's Voice. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Find our Facebook page at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Please hit the like button. It helps us to share information. And then find us also on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please hit the subscribe button so that your listeners can follow us.